Welcome to our YouTube channel, The Alien Tales, and please ensure that you have subscribed.
The universal translator keeps turning my love confessions into insults. She thinks I'm hilarious, you're beautiful, becomes, your face frightens small creatures. 6 months later, she still laughs when I try to be romantic. The diplomatic reception hall buzzed with nervous energy as Ambassador Kael adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the third time. Earth's first contact with the Lyserian Republic hinged on this moment, and his universal translator, a prototype worth more than a small moon, sat heavy against his chest. "Remember, Ambassador," Director Hayes whispered, "the Lyserians value directness and emotional honesty. Don't hold back." Kael nodded, watching the delegation enter. The Lyserians moved with fluid grace, their pale blue skin shimmering under the station's lights. But it was their leader who made his breath catch. Tall and elegant, with silver hair that seemed to flow like liquid starlight and eyes the color of distant nebulae. "I am Envoy Lyralei Stormwind," she said, her melodic voice carrying through the hall. The translator rendered her words in perfect standard, though Kael caught hints of her native tongue's musical quality. "Ambassador Kael Vostok," he replied, stepping forward. "Welcome to Harmony Station. You're..." He paused, wanting to acknowledge her striking presence. "You're absolutely beautiful," the translator hummed, processing. Then, in clear Lyserian, it announced, "Your face frightens small creatures." The hall fell silent. Kael's face flushed crimson. But instead of offense, Lyralei's expression shifted to something unexpected, pure, delighted amusement. She pressed her lips together, shoulders shaking slightly. "That's quite an unusual greeting protocol," she managed, her translated voice dancing with barely contained laughter. That's not what I meant to say," Kael stammered. "Oh, but it's wonderfully creative," Lyralei said, her eyes sparkling. "I've never been compared to a creature-frightening entity before. How refreshingly honest." The other diplomats exchanged glances, but Lyralei's warmth diffused the tension. As they moved toward the conference room, Kael couldn't help but notice how her laughter seemed to make the lights shine brighter. 3 days into the negotiations, Kael cornered Chief Engineer Valdez in the station's technical bay. The universal translator lay in pieces across the workbench, its crystalline core pulsing with erratic light. "The Lyserian linguistic matrix is more complex than we anticipated," Valdez explained, adjusting her neural interface. "Their language operates on emotional frequencies we didn't account for. When you express romantic sentiment, the translator interprets it through their cultural lens of, well, comedic exaggeration. So when I told her she had the grace of a dancer, it said she moved like a drunken space whale." "Yes, I heard." Valdez winced. The diplomatic corps found it charmingly unconventional. Kael groaned, remembering Lyralei's reaction. She'd laughed so hard she'd snorted, an apparently mortifying breach of Lyserian composure that only made her more endearing. "Can you fix it?" "I'm trying, but the emotional subroutines are entangled with the core translation matrix. One wrong adjustment could render you completely incomprehensible." Valdez paused. Though at this point, that might be an improvement. Through the bay's viewport, Kael could see Lyralei in the observation deck, studying star charts with her aide. Even from this distance, her presence seemed to pull at something deep in his chest. "She thinks I'm doing it on purpose," he said quietly. "She told me yesterday that human humor is refreshingly absurd." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Valdez suggested. "When's the last time you saw a Lyserian laugh? They're supposed to be the most serious species in the sector." Kael watched Lyralei point to something on the chart, her silver hair catching the starlight. She looked back toward the technical bay, and even across the distance, her smile was radiant. "That's what worries me," he muttered. The cultural exchange dinner was supposed to be a formal affair, but Lyralei had insisted on something more intimate. Now she sat across from Kael in the station's observation lounge, sharing Lyserian delicacies that tasted like starlight and looked like crystallized dreams. "Your people have fascinating courtship rituals," she said, delicately sampling a piece of earth chocolate. "On Lyceria, We express affection through harmonized singing and synchronized breathing patterns. Kael nearly choked on his wine. Courtship rituals? The insults, she clarified, eyes twinkling. Such elaborate creativity requires significant emotional investment. When you called my voice, like the screech of dying machinery, I was genuinely moved. That was supposed to be like angels singing, Kael said weakly. Angels that screech magnificently, apparently. Lyralei leaned forward, her expression growing curious. Do all humans court through contradictory statements? Or is this your personal innovation? Before Kael could respond, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. The contact sent electricity racing up his arm. I find it endearing, she continued, your dedication to maintaining this elaborate performance. 6 months of consistent character. It shows remarkable commitment. Lyralei, I need to tell you something. Yes, he looked into her eyes, those impossible nebula-colored depths, and felt his heart hammering. I think I'm falling in love with you. The translator word clicked and announced in melodic Lyrian. I believe I am descending into a pit of digestive distress with you. Lyralei blinked once, twice, then dissolved into the kind of laughter that made her entire being seem to glow. She laughed until tears sparkled on her cheeks, until she had to hold her sides. Oh, Kael, she gasped. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Kael found Lyralei in the station's botanical garden, tending to a small Lyrian flowering plant she'd brought as a diplomatic gift. The bioluminescent blooms pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, apparently a sign of contentment. I brought you something, he said, holding out a bundle of earth roses. She looked up, and the plant's glow intensified. How thoughtful. They're roses, he explained. On Earth, we give them to people we. He caught himself knowing what would happen. To people we care about. The translator processed this with its usual mechanical precision. To people we plan to sacrifice to the flower gods. Lyralei accepted the roses with solemn ceremony. I'm honored you'd consider me worthy of divine sacrifice. The flower gods must be quite demanding. Lyralei, there's something I need to explain. Actually, she interrupted, her voice taking on a softer tone. There's something I should tell you first. She cradled the roses against her chest. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about the digestive distress. Kael's heart sank. You have. On Lyceria, we have a saying, true connection begins in the stomach and radiates outward. When you spoke of descending into digestive distress with me, she paused, the plant's glow shifting to deeper blues and purples. I realized I've been experiencing the same sensation. She stepped closer, and Kael caught the scent of ozone and starlight that seemed to follow her everywhere. I believe I'm falling in love with you too, Kael Vostok. Your humor, your creativity, the way you've turned our entire first contact into an elaborate courtship dance. Her hand found his cheek. I've never met anyone who could make me laugh the way you do. The translator remained mercifully silent, perhaps recognizing that some moments transcended language barriers. But Lyralei, shoo! She pressed a finger to his lips. Don't ruin the moment with more hilarious declarations. Just be here with me. Kael paced his quarters like a caged starwolf, Valdez's latest report clutched in his hands. The engineering team had identified the source of the translator's malfunction, a compatibility error so fundamental that fixing it would require completely rebuilding the device. 3 weeks minimum, he muttered, rereading the timeline. 3 weeks where she'll keep thinking I'm performing some elaborate human courtship ritual. The door chimed, and Lyralei's musical voice called out, Kael, may I enter? He quickly stuffed the report into a drawer. Of course, she glided in wearing flowing robes that seemed to capture and reflect the starlight from his viewport. In her hands, she carried a small, intricate device that hummed with soft harmonics. I brought you something, she said, offering the device. It's a harmony resonator, a traditional Lyrian courtship gift. Kael accepted it carefully, feeling the warm vibrations against his palms. It's beautiful. When two Lyrians are falling in love, they exchange resonators. Each one is tuned to the giver's emotional frequency. When you hold it, You're literally feeling an echo of my heart. The device pulsed with warmth, and Kael could swear he felt something. A flutter of joy, a whisper of affection, a harmony that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Lyralei, I know you want to say something wonderfully insulting, she said, settling beside him on his narrow bunk. But could we just sit quietly for a moment? I want to feel your presence without the delightful chaos of your translation errors. She leaned against his shoulder, and the resonator in his hands pulsed more quickly. Through it, he could feel her contentment, her growing affection, the way her heart seemed to skip when he was near. The weight of his deception pressed down like a gravitational field. Lyralei, he whispered. What if I told you the insults weren't intentional? Then I'd say you're an even better actor than I thought. The breakthrough came during a routine diplomatic session. Kael was discussing trade agreements when his translator suddenly started working perfectly. For exactly 93 seconds. The mineral rights could be distributed based on. He began, then froze as he realized his words were being rendered correctly into Lyzerian. Across the table, Lyralei's aide looked confused by the sudden shift from Kael's usual creative interpretations. Desperately, Kael tried to continue the charade, but the translator had found its rhythm. Every word came out exactly as intended, professional and precise and completely devoid of the accidental poetry that had been charming Lyralei for months. She watched him with growing puzzlement, her earlier amusement fading to concern. Are you feeling well, Ambassador? She asked during a recess. You seem different today. I'm fine, he said, and the translator dutifully rendered it as exactly that. No creative embellishment about his health resembling a diseased moon slug. You're speaking normally, she observed, and there was something fragile in her voice. Where are your wonderful contradictions? Your elaborate insults? Before Kael could respond, the translator hiccuped and died completely. His next words came out as pure gibberish, an incomprehensible stream of syllables that made Lyralei's eyes widen in alarm. Kael? What's happening? He fumbled with the device, panic rising in his throat. When he looked up, he saw understanding dawning in her nebula-colored eyes, and with it, a flash of something that might have been hurt. It's been malfunctioning, she said quietly. This whole time, the insults, the contradictions, they weren't intentional. Kael's silence was answer enough. I see. She stood gracefully, her composure perfect except for the slight tremor in her hands. How illuminating. Lyralei, please. But she was already walking away, her silver hair flowing behind her like liquid starlight, and his broken translator turned his desperate call into meaningless static. 2 days passed in diplomatic limbo. The negotiations continued, but with cold, professional efficiency. Lyralei conducted business through her aide, barely looking at Kael. When forced to interact directly, she maintained perfect courtesy and perfect distance. Kael threw himself into helping Valdez rebuild the translator, working 18-hour shifts in the technical bay. His hands shook from too much caffeine and too little sleep as he calibrated emotional resonance matrices and linguistic probability algorithms. You know, Valdez said during one of their marathon sessions, there are worse things than having someone fall in love with your sense of humor. She didn't fall in love with me, Kael said bitterly, adjusting a crystalline component. She fell in love with a malfunction. Did she? Because from where I'm sitting, it looked like she enjoyed your company plenty even when the translator was working correctly. The laughter was just a bonus. Kael paused in his work. Through the bay's viewport, he could see Lyralei in the observation deck again, but this time she stood alone. Her usual grace seemed subdued, her silver hair dim under the starlight. She gave me this, he said quietly, pulling out the harmony resonator. Even now, it pulsed with warm light, echoing with emotions he could barely identify. It's supposed to let me feel her heart. And what does it tell you? Kael closed his eyes, letting the device's vibrations wash over him. Beneath the hurt and confusion, he could sense something else. A persistent note of affection, a harmony that hadn't quite faded. She's sad, he whispered, but not angry, just sad. Then maybe, Valdez suggested gently, it's time to stop hiding behind broken technology and start speaking from your actual heart. That night, Kael stood outside Lyralei's quarters for an hour, raising his hand to press the door chime a dozen times before losing his nerve. In his other hand, the harmony resonator pulsed with patient warmth. Kael found her in the botanical garden at 0300 hours, station time. Lyralei knelt beside her flowering plant, but its usual bioluminescent glow had faded to barely visible wisps of light. She looked up when he approached, her eyes reflecting the dim garden illumination. "I wanted to apologize," he said, settling carefully beside her. No translator hung around his neck. He'd left it in his quarters, along with his courage and most of his coherent thoughts. "For the malfunction?" Her voice was neutral, carefully controlled. "For lying. For letting you believe I was something I'm not." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the plant's dormant petals. "What are you, then?" "Terrified," he admitted. "I'm a career diplomat who's spent his entire adult life negotiating trade agreements and border disputes. I've never been responsible for first contact before, never had to carry the weight of two civilizations meeting for the first time." The plant flickered slightly, responding to some shift in the emotional atmosphere. "And?" she prompted. "And I've never fallen in love with someone I was supposed to be professionally neutral toward." The words came out in a rush. "When that translator started turning everything I said into absurdity, I was mortified. But then you laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, and I didn't want it to stop." Lyralei's hand stilled on the plant. "So you let me believe you were being intentionally clever. I let you believe whatever made you happy." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the harmony resonator. "This has been pulsing for weeks, even when you were angry with me." "What does that mean?" She accepted the device, holding it up to catch what little light filtered through the garden's artificial sky. "It means my heart doesn't listen to my head very well." "Is that a Lyralian trait?" "No," she said softly. "I think it might be universal. I've been thinking about something you said," Lyralei continued, the harmony resonator pulsing steadily between them. "About falling in love with someone you're supposed to be professionally neutral toward." Kael felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I shouldn't have. We have a concept on Lysyria called Thalereni. It translates roughly as the harmony that disrupts harmony. It's what happens when two people are drawn together despite every logical reason they shouldn't be." The plant beside them began to glow more brightly, its bioluminescent petals unfurling in response to their shifting emotional resonance. "On Lysyria, we believe the heart has its own language, one that doesn't need translation." She moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When you held my hand at dinner, when you brought me flowers, when you looked at me like I was the most fascinating puzzle in the universe, your translator might have been saying ridiculous things, but your heart was speaking perfectly clearly." "What was it saying?" "The same thing mine was." She placed the resonator in his palm, covering his hand with both of hers. "That some connections transcend language barriers, translation errors, and diplomatic protocol." The device pulsed with warmth, and through it, Kael could feel the steady rhythm of her affection. Not the giddy infatuation he'd feared he'd destroyed, but something deeper, more patient, more real. "I thought you'd fallen in love with someone who didn't exist," he said. "I thought you were performing an elaborate courtship ritual from a culture I didn't understand." She smiled, and starlight seemed to dance in her eyes. "We were both wrong, and both right. How do we move forward from here?" "Carefully," she said. "Honestly. And maybe with a functioning translator, just to be safe." They sat in comfortable silence, the garden's plants responding to their shared contentment with gentle waves of bioluminescent color. Sometimes, Kael reflected, the best translations happened without any technology at all. 6 months later, Kael stood in the same diplomatic reception hall where their story had begun, but everything had changed. His new translator, Valdez's masterpiece, hung silent around his neck, its emotional resonance matrices finally calibrated to handle the nuances of Lysyrian romance. "Are you ready for this?" Lyralei asked, adjusting the ceremonial sash that marked her new role as permanent Earth-Lysyria liaison. The posting would keep her at Harmony Station indefinitely, a diplomatic coup that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with the way she looked at him across crowded rooms. "As ready as I'll ever be to address the Interstellar Council about our unconventional first contact protocols. She laughed. That same delighted sound that had started everything. I still think we should mention the part about digestive distress. It's become quite popular in Lyralian romantic poetry. Absolutely not. They walked toward the council chamber hand in hand, their harmony resonators chiming softly in synchronized rhythm. Behind them, the botanical garden bloomed with unprecedented brightness. Two species of flowers somehow finding ways to grow together despite every botanical law suggesting they shouldn't. Kael, Lyralei paused at the chamber doors. Yes, I love you, she said simply, in perfect, unfiltered standard. I love you too, he replied in carefully practiced Lyralian, the words flowing like music. His translator remained mercifully silent, finally understanding that some things needed no translation at all. Inside the council chamber, diplomats from a dozen species waited to hear how a malfunctioning universal translator had accidentally created the most successful interspecies diplomatic relationship in recorded history. Kael and Lyralei exchanged a look, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Should we tell them the truth? She whispered. Which version? The one where we fell in love despite the technology, or the one where we fell in love because of it? Kael considered this, watching her silver hair catch the chamber's lights, feeling the steady pulse of her harmony resonator against his palm. Both, he decided. After all, the best love stories have always been a little lost in translation.